My name is Mary Beth Farringer. I'm the Executive Director of the Council on Aging, and we did want to welcome you here. I am not on the program. Unfortunately, Caroline Chamberlain, who's the chairman of our advisory council and the one that led the planning of this, is unable to be with us today because she's having to care for an aging parent. And while we're very, very sorry about that, it kind of illustrates how caring for parents, among other issues that baby boomers are facing, really affects our lives. So she does send her regrets, and she could not be here. We did want to thank you all for coming and taking your time and showing your interest in these issues that we think is affecting our entire community and will affect our community in the coming years. One issue is we don't think the community knows how it is affecting our community. A little bit about the Council on Aging. We are a nonprofit agency, a small agency whose mission is to find comprehensive solutions for the unmet needs of seniors and their caregivers. We work closely with government agencies and businesses to try to find solutions to some of the issues. The Advisory Council, who is the committee that is putting on this summit, is composed of nonprofit leaders from throughout the community that serve the aging population. They early on last year realized that the great number of baby boomers who are becoming seniors is going to have a major impact on our entire community. And they realized they were not prepared and that the community was not prepared, and came up with the idea of having a summit for leaders that would bring to fore the issues, some of the issues that we see that are affected by this. A couple of housekeeping things. There is coffee and water out the room behind here. As you exit the room, restrooms are to the left. As everyone has gotten used to, please silence your cell phones. We did want to thank the sponsors of this event who helped make it possible. They're listed in your program, but I did want to mention them. That's Alive Hospice, GNRC Area Agency on Aging and Disability, McKendree Village, Senior Services Network, and Vanderbilt Home Care. In addition, the Tennessee Respite Coalition provided the water, and Metro Social Services enabled us to get the use of this auditorium. Now we'll get on with the program. It's my pleasure to introduce our overview speakers who kind of give a broad sense, and then the panel will get into more local issues. But doing the overview are to my immediate left, Ernestine Bowers, who's the director of the Area Agency on Aging. And to her left is Rebecca Kelly, who's the state director of AARP Tennessee. And then to Rebecca's left is Vicki Harris, who is vice president with Inspiris, and she will be moderating the panel and will introduce them. So I'll turn it over to Ernestine and Rebecca.
Thank you, Mary Beth. We're delighted to be here today. It's a very important and appropriate topic for us to be facing at this point. Ernestine and I have had a great time preparing for our discussion today. We are boomers. We are boomers, you are boomers. How many boomers do we have in the room today? So it's not just a profession, it is hitting us personally. I turned 50 in June of this year. I have two stepsons in college, a freshman and a senior. So we're paying those tuitions. And between my husband and me, we have 4 parents between 75 and 85 years old. So this is extremely relevant to me, not just as a profession, but as a female caregiver, mom, working professional. So, and I know that you identify. So it couldn't be more relevant. Boomers have fun. We're going to talk about that. I remember singing M-I-C-K-E-Y. Y'all remember that? We're going to talk about the diversity of this population today. And then we'll look at some of the more critical issues that are facing the challenges of boomers today, and look at what some folks are doing to address those challenges. Ernestine, you're a boomer, right?
Yes, Rebecca, I'm a boomer. And I will turn 59 next month. Now, I don't mind telling you my age, but don't ask about my weight. I have one friend who will not, she said when she dies, she will not disclose her age. So I have no problem with my age. But I am an empty nester. I'm single. I have an adult daughter, and I have three grandchildren, ranging in age from 8 to 18. So I feel like I'm going through raising teenagers again. Until last year, I was a caregiver for my mother. I assisted with other family members. She passed this last January, and so now we are providing care and support to my adult sister who has a developmental disability. So I'm still in the caregiving business. Last year, some of you may know that I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and so I have been going through treatments and surgeries over the last year, and we think that that has been fairly successful. Like many other late midlife boomers, I am feeling the biological changes. I feel them every day I get out of bed. I feel a new pain somewhere. And so I'm dealing with those biological changes and declines, but I'm also trying to plan the transition from active full-time work to possibly part-time work. I still want to remain engaged in some way as I go into the next chapter of my life. So as Rebecca said, this is a very relevant topic to us, and we hope that it will be for you as well.
AARP conducted a survey last year of people born in 1946. I could do a hand showing of that as well. But there were three main conclusions from that survey, and I want to just share those with you. Boomers turning 60 in 2006 remained substantially satisfied with their lives. At the same time, they're optimistic for an even better future and making plans to bring about that result. So the survey showed not only do they have optimistic attitudes toward the future, but they want to be part of making that happen and part of the solutions for the future. Another one is that they, virtually all of those in this group have some substantial life change they want to make. 87% want to take better care of their physical health. 72% plan to spend more time with their interests and hobbies. And 47% want to do more volunteering. So for those of us who depend on volunteers, they do still want to volunteer. I think we have to look at how we do that, but they very much do want to continue to. And lastly, work is likely to continue to play a major role in their lives. Currently, 54% of 60-year-olds are still working, compared to 74% of all boomers. And 14% of those working plan to go back to work, 14% of those not working plan to go back to work in the next few years. Over half of those working now, 54%, plan to quit working soon, and another 37% said, I'm going to work till I drop. So I think many of us are in that category as well. Lots of reasons for that, and you are familiar with those reasons. Some just want to continue to do that because they love their work. Others very much need to work as a part of their financial future. Another piece of this survey was, on a lighter note in some cases, the best possible birthday gift for somebody turning 60. You might think of what you'd like to have for your 60th birthday when you turn 60. But again, this showed the gamut of how boomers think, wide range of ideal gifts. One said 50 pounds to be gone instantly. Another one, that people would forget that I'm 60. Another one, a gift of new arteries, or a gift of love, a gift of pension and Social Security solvency, that pensions would be secure and that Social Security would be solvent. A gift would be for someone I love to stop drinking, and another one was the gift of immortality. So my hunch is that we see ourselves in many of those gifts that we would ask for ourselves when we turn 60. So let's look at the national demographics of the boomers. Who are they? The definition of a baby boomer, as many of you know, I'm sure, is people who were born between 1946 and 1964. According to the U.S. Census, there are approximately 78.1 million baby boomers in this country today. As we've said earlier, boomers are a diverse group. You can't lump them into one category. They have different interests, different plans, different skill sets, and they have influenced every system they have encountered from the time they were born. Certainly we know the school systems, the volunteering, the resources for our schools. Our schools look differently because of baby boomers. Daycare looks different because of the influence and the impact of boomers. And we believe that long-term care is going to look different because of the influence and the involvement of baby boomers. Boomers have the greatest rate of higher education. More than 25% of men and 23% of women have college or graduate degrees, and nearly 10% are self-employed. And we think that number is going to increase rapidly. Other pieces, since 1900, these numbers are just staggering, and they're up there for you. Since 1900, the percentage of Americans aged 65 and over has more than tripled from 1.2% of the population to 12.4% of the population in 2000. More than tripled in that one century. We have talked in groups like this about the fact that the retirement age was set at 65 several decades ago because the longevity rate was more similar to 65 than well over 100 as we're experiencing today. In 2000, there were 35 million people over the age of 65 in the United States, representing 1.8 Americans. That number is expected to double by 2030 to 70 million Americans, or 1 in 5 people. Staggering numbers.
Okay. Well, what about the generation before the boomers? Research tells us that the fastest growing segment of the population is the old, those persons 85 plus and over. And let's look at the population shift since during the 20th century. In the year 2000, the 65 to 70 age group segment grew 8 times larger than there were in 1900. The 74 to 84-year-old segment was 18 times larger than in 1900. And in 2000, the 85-plus population was 34 times larger than in 1900. The National Institute on Aging predicts that centenarians could increase their numbers to more than 1.2 million by the middle of this century. Some of you may know when Willard Scott was on television on NBC, he would spotlight those persons who had reached the age of 100. Well, if the predictions continue, it would probably take hours to go through the 100-year-olds that we are expected to have in the next few years. In terms of Davidson County, according to the latest census figures, there are over 124,000 Nashvillians who are boomers. This is almost 1 in 5 Nashvillians of the 605,000 population. So by the time the new mayor ends his term, the first boomers will reach the traditional age of 65, that traditional retirement age. Looking at more demographics for Davidson County, in the year 2000, the number of 60-plus older persons living in this county was 83,000, a little over 83,000, which represents 14% of the total population. In 2005, the total population for Davidson County was over 91,000, or 15%. But projections for the year 2025, there will be approximately 147,000 persons who will reach the age of 60. And this will represent 21% of the Davidson County population. So you can see the increase that we will be experiencing just here in Davidson County. And quite frankly, Davidson County was one of the slower growing population counties. The surrounding counties really had much higher growth rates. So because of the growing population, there will be a number of issues that we will be facing as a community. And Rebecca will talk about some of those issues.
I know these numbers aren't new to you, but we felt like it was important to sort of start with actual numbers and the percentages and the change in this century. It truly is staggering. And We know that those numbers represent human beings who are going to need services and be part of our systems, and so we think it's really relevant. It's not just about numbers, but the issues that are facing this population are significant, perhaps the most significant that our country has faced so far in its history. It seems that the issues facing this group are combined in several areas. One, of course, and not the least of which, is health and supportive services. We know people are very concerned about health care and access to affordable and quality health care. Financial security, housing, transportation, lifelong learning, public safety, and civic engagement and opportunities. We're going to go deeper in some of these issues later, but Ernestine and I want to just highlight a little bit of the challenges that we think are facing us and some of the solutions that we're already looking at across the country and in Davidson County.
In terms of health and supportive services, recent reports indicate that the number of Americans without health insurance has reached 47 million, and this number has increased by over 2 million in the past year. Access to affordable health care and preventive services is a growing concern among many older adults who have greater risk of suffering from acute and chronic diseases. Health risks continue to increase with higher obesity rates than ever before, and more Americans have limited or no physical activity, so we really got to do our part to try and maintain our health ourselves. Many employers are no longer offering health care benefits to workers, and with limited transportation systems operating, it's more difficult for people to get to the doctor and to hospitals, and this affects access to health care. Numerous agencies are offering valuable services for older persons, but the information is so diverse, so dispersed that it's difficult for the average individual to navigate this system. We do have a system of home and community-based services that are being provided, but it's being provided in a rather piecemeal fashion, and it's not in a coordinated fashion. We have received a grant. The Commission on Aging did receive a grant from the Administration on Aging and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid to assist in streamlining the system to be able to offer a single entry point for people who need information about long-term care services and to access those services in one place. And so we're working on getting that system in place. It's still a work in progress. There are only 2 pilot sites operating right now, and the grant will end in 2008. And so we're faced with the possibility of trying to continue to fund this systems change initiative, as well as spread this single point of entry concept throughout the state. So we're still facing the fact of trying to find funding to be able to have a system, a one-stop shop for long-term care services in Tennessee.
We often talk about those who are inside the systems having difficulty finding the right spot for folks to get services, and we know that it's even harder for the general consumer to know where to go for the services they need. So the single point of entry is so important, and we all need to make sure that the funding is available and that we work to make sure that that funding continues for the single point of entry process. We want to talk now a little bit about financial security. We also know that people are very worried about financial security in this country. There's been a major shift from employers often offering defined benefit pension plans until you die, to the new focus on defined contribution plans where the responsibility is much more up to the individual to prepare for their future. We're encouraging people to pay attention to this, to share this with their children, to encourage grandchildren to save as early as they can in any way that they possibly can. We are working at the national level with our members of Congress to pass some federal legislation that would impact this. Auto IRAs, for example. We know, and research has shown, that when you automatically enroll someone in a vehicle, a savings vehicle in their workplace, like a 401k, they're less hesitant to opt out, but they're also hesitant to opt in when you're faced with the tuitions in long-term care and a myriad of financial challenges in front of you, the focus is more immediate than long-term. And so we're really working with employers to say, recognize your role and as the facilitator of where people get their paychecks, and make sure that you do everything you can to automatically enroll them. We'd love for them to continue the defined benefit plan. That's just a dying practice, unfortunately. But as they do defined contribution plans, we're encouraging them to automatically enroll folks and match that as much as they possibly can. It's staggering that of the 70 million workers in the country today, only half of them have access to any vehicle for retirement savings at all. Half of those are taking advantage of it. So half of workers who have access to a pension plan are leaving money on the table. They are literally not taking action to take advantage of that. Another staggering statistic is that of the people who are saving for retirement, the average amount saved is $50,000. Now, how long can you live on $50,000? And we're talking about the retirement years and people living longer and well into over 100. It's just not enough, and it's just not adequate. So it's going to take all of the work that all of us can do to make sure that we're ready for the future. Another factor is that many grandparents are active caregivers and are raising their grandchildren. Again, the numbers are staggering. Across the United States, more than 6 million children are being raised in households headed by grandparents right now. In Tennessee, that number is 61,252 grandparents who have active responsibility for raising their grandchildren. Another piece of that, I think about a third of them have children present in the house. So 2/3 of the case have no children. They have direct care for the grandchildren and skip that parent responsibility. That impacts the financial security. They're worried about their own long-term care future as well as the concerns of their children. AERP is so concerned about this that we are embarking on perhaps the greatest effort we have ever encountered as an organization. We are combining with the Business Roundtable and SEIU and other health groups to create a movement in this country called Divided We Fail, implying that united we can have the solution. And what we're doing is working individually to encourage individuals to take responsibility, to work with businesses, as I've already talked about, but also immediately raise the level of discussion with our presidential candidates to offer solutions, bipartisan solutions, to health care and long-term financial security in this country. It's critical. It's the two most important domestic issues facing our country. Our research indicates that these two issues are what people are waking up at night worrying about, is access to affordable health care and their long-term financial security. So if you would love, many of you have already signed our pledge cards. It's just a tool that we have to raise the number, raise the awareness of presidential candidates that we care about health care and financial security in this country. Patrick Willard, our new advocacy director, has the pledge cards, has passed some of those out. We'd love for you to sign those, and we'll collect them at the end of the day. The only thing we're asking is that you sign that saying, I will vote for the presidential candidate who most closely addresses solutions for health care and financial security.
The next issue is housing. Many studies have shown that older persons want to remain in their home. They want to age in place. And the existing home and community-based services, there is a lack of housing options out there for people. We need to have more programs that will assist persons in modifying their home to be able to live in them longer or move to a residence that is more accessible. We need to look at more affordable or more appropriate housing for persons who have changing physical needs. While there are services available for home modification, there are too few dollars that would go towards modifying an existing home. Tennessee has made some improvements in with the passage of the property relief tax that would allow an older person to remain in their homes and freeze their property taxes. But there's still much to be done at the state and federal, state and local level. We would like to commend the Mayor Purcell, because he is one of the few mayors who have actually implemented this new legislation to be able to allow older persons to remain in their homes and keep those property taxes lower or freeze them. But more work needs to be done in terms of partnerships with housing organizations so that services can be provided and that people can remain in their homes longer. We have a statewide Medicaid waiver program that does have a home modification feature in that waiver that would build ramps and add grab bars and bathrooms and other things that would allow a person to remain in their homes. But those funds are limited to people who qualify for that program. Otherwise, there are no funds available otherwise outside of that program, and you must meet financial as well as functional guidelines to meet those needs to qualify for that program. We also need to encourage builders and developers to encourage them to utilize universal design when they are constructing new construction. Those things include wider doorways and accessible bathrooms, having them on the first level so that people who may not be able to climb stairs will have access to a bathroom. We also want to look at the visitability, and this is a new concept for me as well. It's a new word. I've been working with the Developmental Disabilities Council, and this is a concept where a person with a disability would be able to visit other people, to be able to access their homes, to visit other people in the community. So we have new concepts for construction, and we need to do more of those things and look at what other states are doing in terms of providing more accessible housing for people so that they can remain in their homes and a part of the community for as long as possible.
Let's look now at transportation. Several angles of transportation need to be improved. We're not doing enough still for people who prefer walking. And we're learning from other countries about how important it is to walk. And we've made some progress on sidewalk cutaways, and we still have a long way to go in that area as well. But we need to look at our roads and our systems and our communities in terms of promoting walking for people and conducting community audits. Where do we need to improve? What sections of our neighborhoods and communities need work in this area? Many older drivers experience difficulties with today's driving environment. I don't know how many of you commute, but I personally have a long commute. I live south of here, and every morning I'm amazed at the things people are doing in their vehicles. Just can't believe it. I think my favorite story yet is looking over at 70 miles an hour on 65 North and seeing a gentleman eating breakfast. It looked like a bowl and a spoon. I do not know what he was driving with or how he was maneuvering his vehicle, but with the advent of Blackberries and cell phones, we're doing way too many other things while we drive. And so that alone is staggering in the environment. We need more visible road signs. I also am beginning to be fearful of driving at night. It's difficult to see highway signs and road signs at night. The font size on those streets need to be larger already. Lots of things we can do in that area. Educating drivers, particularly as they get older, on the physiological changes as we age, and being able to overcompensate for that as we drive, as we get older and as we drive. AERP offers a driver safety class. We trained over 400,000 people last year, just making them more aware and more alert of conditions and things to be careful for. Another fact that I smiled about, I see newsletters from across the country, and you may be pleased to know that the oldest known participant in our driver safety classes is 102 years old. I was pleased that they don't live in Tennessee. They're kind of in the Midwest, but clearly that individual is still driving, and more importantly, wants to continue to learn how to be a safe driver. So Consumer-oriented community transportation. We need to do much more in terms of transit options in this city and in the state and in the country. More options need to be available, those options need to be flexible, and they need to be consumer-oriented. And so this may be one of the greatest challenges in terms of the directions we need to improve to keep people independent and more mobile. Many states are also looking at volunteer drivers to supplement the work that we're already doing with the Older Americans Act programs, but individuals who would volunteer to be a driver for a neighborhood or for families or individuals, a new role for boomers of just sort of helping out and being a volunteer driver.
Okay. And Rebecca, in Davidson County, we have started work on trying to make transportation options a bit more accessible. For example, we have been working with the Metro Social Services in utilizing the public transportation system. The Metro Social Services has given tickets to those persons who participate in the congregate nutrition program to allow them to be able to transport to and from those nutrition sites. We're also working with Metro Transit Authority in providing a travel trainer program. This program goes to senior housing facilities and conducts classes that helps a person to understand the Metro Transit system. Many people are very stressed to think about trying to ride the public transportation system. And so this program familiarizes them with that system and also provides tickets so that they can actually go on an outing on a Metro Transit bus. And so there are a few things that we are doing locally. However, there still remain a lot of challenges in terms of transportation. This always shows as the #1 need for people in the community when we conduct needs assessments. In terms of lifelong learning opportunities, boomers are proving that they want to continue to learn as long as they are alive. Relatively few of our community-based arts, cultural, and enrichment programs are targeting older adults. So we must provide a robust range of programs to enable older persons to be able to contribute to the cultural life of the community. Of the programs that do exist, many of them do not appeal or engage the talents of an increasingly diverse older population. We must increase these opportunities around arts and cultural productions. I've just returned from a conference in Savannah, Georgia, where I sat in on a workshop related to it was I can't think of the name of it now. It was a naturally occurring retirement community. And they had developed a program, a wonderful cultural program through the Georgia Council on Humanities. And I think Ruth Garrett was one of the ones that started that program when she lived in Savannah. And they just have a wonderful array of classes and opportunities for seniors, from classes on Jane Eyre to Savannah history to just some of everything. And I was just very impressed with that program. Locally, we do have a wonderful program at the Donaldson Station Senior Center. They have a senior center for the arts where they produce plays, and it's a wonderful opportunity for some of you, and I think some of you may have participated in some of those productions. But it's a wonderful opportunity, but we need to do more to be able to engage older persons, and of course boomers, to continue to learn as we age. Older adults frequently do not have an opportunity to stay up to date in advanced technology. But we're finding that if a senior center, for example, offers classes on computer operations, that those classes are full and with waiting lists. So we must encourage community organizations to have those types of classes available so that seniors who may have some concern about operating a computer will become much more comfortable and will be able to navigate this computer technology that we're all involved in right now. I told Rebecca earlier that my brother-in-law took a class on computer operations, and it was a class for seniors. And he said he was concerned about whether he should have taken a beginner's class or an intermediate or some other class. But he came home one day and was very frustrated because the people in this beginner's class did not understand how to use the mouse. And so they spent the entire class trying to figure out how the mouse worked. But we must have these types of programs in the community so that as most of us, I think most of boomers sort of have gotten accustomed to computers, but there may be others in the community who may not. And so we need to continue to encourage these nonprofit organizations to offer these types of classes and to make them accessible to older persons.
Public safety continues to be a concern. Older individuals express their concerns about the safety in neighborhoods, and we need to continue to offer good programs like Neighborhood Watch programs. Look at continuing things like the mail carrier alert systems, where officials who are always in the neighborhoods are trained to spot something that looks a little different. And then I think just raising the awareness of neighbors and communities to look for each other. We know that perhaps the largest deterrent to the neighborhood feel is the garage door opener, where we open the garage door and we drive in and we close it and we don't really know what's going around beside us, going on around. We need to raise the awareness of sort of taking care of each other. Elder abuse continues to rise. Very tough issue, and it's tough because often it happens within the family. And so another issue that we've got to continue to work on and train law enforcement professionals to detect and report elder abuse. And again, educate our communities and our neighborhoods to the fact that it's out there, it exists, and we need to pay attention. Identity theft is the most rapidly growing crime in the country today. There is a new form of identity theft every day. Have any of you been personal victims of identity theft? I had my purse stolen a year and a half ago and will never be the same. The average loss per person from identity theft right now is $6,000 per person, per pop. Critical issue facing our country today. Just recently heard of the TVA retirees credit union. You know TVA well in this state. Someone is posing as a representative of the TVA Retirees Credit Union and has gone online to members of that group and said, we are changing our systems, and when we're about to close your account, and if you want your account to continue, press here. And when you do that, then you've given them the information to your identity. Critical issue, and it's going to take all of us to fight it. AARP was instrumental in passing the Credit Report Act of 2007 in this legislative session. It's not the sole solution, but it gives folks a couple of more tools. One is to have better control over your credit report so that if somebody does steal your wallet and tries to open an account in your name, then you lock access to your credit report and they cannot access that. Another one is that we're working to try to prevent Social Security numbers from being in the public domain. It is still an option, a checkbox on your driver's license. Do you want your Social Security number on your driver's license or not? There's no reason for your Social Security number to be on your driver's license. And I won't ask this group because I'm sure that there's not a single person in this room that still has your Social Security number on your driver's license. But statements, businesses who are still putting your Social Security number on statements and mailing that to your home. And all it takes is someone to take that out of your mailboxes. So still a long way to go in that area, and it's going to take all of the smartest thinking in the brains that we have to combat this criminal element.
Civic engagement opportunities. As studies have proven, older adults who retire or move to part-time employment want to give back to the community. They want to become in meaningful and purposeful volunteer opportunities. And so this presents a real challenge to nonprofit organizations out there to look at trying to recruit, train, and retain volunteers. I don't think boomers are going to want to stuff envelopes. And so it's going to present a challenge to you to be able to offer meaningful volunteer opportunities. Baby boomers perhaps may not want to volunteer on an ongoing basis. They may want to volunteer for a particular project. And so we're going to have to really rethink how we look at volunteers in terms of recruiting and getting them engaged in some of our local programs. So we need to have a larger, broader array of opportunities out there so that boomers can continue to contribute to the community.
Ernestine and I have tried to spend the last few minutes just sort of hitting the high spots, just headlining what we think are the challenges of the aging future in our country, just the high spots. What we do know is it's going to take the effort of all of us. As we've said earlier, it's going to take responsibility of individuals. It's going to take the responsibility of businesses. And we must have the best policies we can have from government to make sure that we are offering solutions, solid solutions to the challenging issues in our country. It is not okay any longer for Congress to continue to not act on these issues. So we believe that together we can make a difference, and divided we will fail.
And we'd like to thank the Council on Aging for allowing us this opportunity to share some of the issues that we think are critical as we move forward in the next few years. Thank you.
We'd certainly like to thank Ms. Kelly and Ms. Bowers for giving us an overview of the many issues that will result from boomers aging. Your presence here today certainly tells us that either you have already acknowledged the potential impact of the boomers on our community, or you are a professional in the community, in the aging profession, or that you are at least curious about what the impact could be. Our goal today is simply to heighten your awareness about the impact of the aging boomer population, and to challenge you to think about the interrelationship of the many issues that Ms. Kelly and Ms. Bowers highlighted today. They actually impact every facet of our community, including your own organization if you are here representing a company. At the end of the day, we want to be able to move you to start the assessment and planning process internally and join us in a much broader community-based planning and assessment process to prepare for the aging boomers. As I sit and listen to the statistics, the question I kept asking myself, are we ready? I don't think so. Just looking at the current senior population in our community, we are ill prepared to meet their needs. So when you think about the numbers that the boomers will represent as they age, then we are very much ill prepared. And so the time is here, time is now, that we need to start that process. They have highlighted many numerous and multifaceted and what I consider to be complex issues. And one of the things I want to say to you is there is no one single solution to these issues that they've pointed out. The population is very diverse, so I see the solutions being also very diverse. There won't be one strategy that will solve it. There won't be one option that will meet everyone's needs. Boomers are a generation of choices, and I think as we age, we will continue to be a generation that requires choices. COA paused just as we are doing here today and asked themselves, are we ready? And they actually said no. They spent a little while talking about what do we want to be called as aging boomers. And everybody have had this conversation in their organizations if they work in an aging organization, and nobody can land on any one name. We don't want to be called seniors. We're obviously boomers, so maybe we're going to be elder boomers, but I'm not too sure about that one either. So you could probably do a whole summit around what do we want to be called. But as I said before, we're a generation of choices, so there will probably not be one name that resonates with us. It will be whatever we choose to be based on whichever individual boomer you're talking to. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you our panel. COA decided that the issues are broad and far-reaching, but you have to start somewhere. And they actually selected 3 areas to start with to begin the awareness, to enhance the awareness of the community and start that planning process. The areas are housing, employment, and financing and access to health care. Our panelists today represent those 3 topics, and I have the pleasure of introducing those folks. The first person on our panel is David Minigan, and he is the master planner and senior designer and principal with Earl Swinson and Associates here in Nashville, and he's been there since 1982. He's a graduate of UT in Knoxville, and during his 25 years with this Nashville-based firm, which also practices internationally, he has led the design of an extensive array of senior living communities across the country. These include independent living, assisted living, memory-enhanced and or skilled nursing facilities in various locations. He is to be commended for his involvement in such Nashville projects as Homewood Residence at Brookmont Terrace, Mary Queen of Angels Assisted Living Facility, and the recently opened Cumberland at the Green Hills. He is a noted author of published articles and is often quoted as an expert. David, glad to have you. Our second panelist is Marilyn Dubree, and Marilyn is the Executive Chief Nursing Officer at Vanderbilt Medical Center. She is responsible for the clinical and professional leadership for Vanderbilt University hospitals and clinics. Ms. Dubree is responsible for strategic initiatives and planning related to the provision of quality nursing care across the medical center. She is a member of the Clinical Enterprise Executive Committee, which has oversight for strategic direction and planning for the medical center. Under Ms. Dubree's leadership, Vanderbilt Medical Center recently became the only magnet-designated medical center in Middle Tennessee. For all of you who don't know, magnet designation is one of the highest achievements of an organization can attain in recognition of its nursing staff and its professionalism. Glad to have you. Our third panelist is Vita White, and Vita White is currently Senior Human Resource Generalist at Caterpillar Financial here in Nashville, with their employee relations and EEO compliance response areas. She is a graduate of South Carolina State University with a bachelor's degree in marketing and received her MBA from Western Michigan University. In addition, she has received her Professional in Human Resources designation. She has 8 years of human resource experience in staffing and recruitment, compensation and benefits, and employee relations. Both Ms. White and Ms. Dubree will focus on the employment component of today's conversation. Our final panelist is Warren Beck, and Mr. Beck is currently the Vice President of Finance for the Vanderbilt Clinical Enterprise, which includes the Vanderbilt University Hospital and Clinic, the Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital and Clinic, and the Vanderbilt Psychiatric Hospital. Warren has been with the university for 19 years, and he has been in his current role for the last 12 years. In his current position, he is responsible for oversight of the general accounting and financial reporting functions, budgeting and third-party reimbursement, fixed assets management, and financial support to the clinical lines and physician practices at the medical center. Prior to joining Vanderbilt, Warren spent three and a half years as a manager with KPMG, P. Warwick, providing healthcare consulting services. Warren is has an undergraduate degree in accounting from Rutgers and an MBA in finance from Farley Dickinson University. He also holds a faculty appointment as an assistant professor in the Vanderbilt School of Medicine and Medical Administration. Warren will talk to us about the very important topic of access and financing to health care. So we want to thank each of those folks for joining us today as we look at those 3 areas of housing, employment, and access and financing of health care. We're going to start off with housing. Housing is a very basic need, and when you think about it, very basic. And I was reminded of that as I walked into the library this afternoon, as I saw a couple of homeless gentlemen sitting out there, and they looked aged. And so homeless is a very basic need. Ms. Kelly and Ms. Bowers have highlighted just a little bit some of the popular concepts that boomers prefer aging in place. We want to stay right where we are. Also talked a little bit about home and community-based services. But when we stop and we think about the boomers aging and the numbers that we're going to be encountering, housing for us and the disabled citizenry of our community will be as diverse as the individuals that make up the groups. And so when we start thinking about, are we ready to meet the housing needs of a growing senior population, we need to stop and think about a continuum of housing options. Because I'm a senior, I may not need assisted living, but I may not be able to live in my own home that I've lived in for 30 years. So really, planning for housing has to be planning with a continuum of housing options in mind. Yes, we all desire to live in our home and age in place, but the reality is that we may not be able to do that, and it may not be optimal. The housing option decision will and should be based on an individual's needs and where they are on the independence scale that drives the need for supportive services, safety, and affordability. David with Earl Swinson will talk to us a little bit this afternoon about the current trends associated with senior housing that are currently available and what his organization sees as trends as we approach 2010, 2030. David?
Thank you, Vicki. Let me begin by saying that most of the experience that we have is in institutional care, as opposed to as much aging in place and home health care. And Vicki mentioned that the boomers are looking for a name for themselves. In the world of institutional care for the seniors, there already is a nomenclature. We talk about the go-goes, the slow-goes, and the no-goes. And folks fit into different categories as they age. I'll also talk a little bit about other methods of the senior care delivery, but it's not necessarily from the position that we're most familiar. And also, most of what we've done is in other cities, in other parts of the country. So I'll try to take as much as possible from what we've seen in other places and apply that to the Nashville market. I think Rebecca and Ernestine have already set the stage for the crisis that we'll be facing, and the numbers are absolutely staggering. Current facilities have been modestly keeping up with the institutional needs of seniors over the last 10 years. We've seen some growth in the last 5 to 7 years, more than before that. As we look, however, over the next 20 to 25 years, we're going to see a huge spike in the needs if we're going to fulfill the institutional requirements as projected by the population growth of seniors. Now, some of these needs can be met relatively easily. Assisted living and memory care are licensed but non-regulated facilities in most places. However, nursing beds require a certificate of need, which is often difficult to obtain. And the CCRCs, or continuing care retirement communities, are very time-consuming and costly to develop, especially if they are entry fee type communities. So let's look at some of the factors which will affect the timing and the entry of seniors into the institutional market. I think this cartoon says it all. According to a study by MetLife Mature Markets Institute, there's a growing segment of the population that's called the working retired. It's already been referred to. This is a trend which not only will affect senior housing, but was affecting the labor force tremendously. The reasons that many seniors are going to stay into the workforce are, as was mentioned, the needed income to live on, the desire to stay active and engaged. They want opportunities to do meaningful work. They want to maintain a certain lifestyle, and they need to build additional retirement savings. I think the significance of this is that seniors in the future will demand, and in many cases, be willing to pay for quality. In the private pay world of institutional care, it's become very competitive. The age that boomers will enter the institutional market is much older than in the past. And I think what that really means is that the social factors that will affect the boomers. Healthcare folks are doing a great job of keeping people living longer, keeping people going longer. What's happening is that by the time they are older, they are sicker. The issues are more critical. At that time, according to an article in Time magazine last year, at-home services will grow, allowing aging in place to increase. How that happens, we're not sure. Maybe Warren will tell us, but there's a lot of buzz about this segment of care and perhaps more opportunities for innovation here. And really, one of the things that will drive care in the future is the fact that folks know more about the different options that are available to them. My wife is an example. My mother-in-law is now in a nursing home, been there about a week. Over the last year, she has learned more about assisted living, memory care, and now skilled nursing than she ever thought she'd have to. The interesting thing was that, and this I think is a trend of the boomers, is that now that she knows what assisted living is, she's not afraid of it. In fact, she said, she could get in, she'd move right now, but I'm not ready. So what does the future look like? Well, we're seeing an increase in doctors making house calls. I think that's an interesting phenomena that we've seen. What a wonderful opportunity that is. I don't know if it'll continue, but if it does, then there are much better options for seniors. Studies have shown that doctors can actually get better information from a patient at home in their own environment than they can when the patient has to have their lifestyle disrupted to make an office visit. The doctor can actually see the living environment and to see what the real life conditions are there. The technology is driving a lot of this. That same doctor will be able to check you out at home, then download that information to a computer in his office and can monitor your progress or your vital signs from your house with updated information from your home computer. That's going to be an interesting concept. So what are the pros and cons of this? Obviously, the benefits are that there are easier transitions, that you can stay in your home longer, you can maintain your current lifestyle, it's easier on family, it's less disruption for you. I know that moving my mother-in-law from facility to facility to facility just in and of itself caused a lot of agitation. The disadvantages of staying at home, oftentimes poor nutritional habits. There's no one there to maintain good eating habits, potential lack of physical activity, and the need for socialization, probably the most important thing, and something that actually is being addressed. Organizations like Senior Citizens, Inc. Have done a wonderful job at alleviating many of the disadvantage of the aging in place, and have done a wonderful job for social programs and educational programs too. We had the pleasure of working with Janet Jernigan and her folks at the Martin Center in Williamson County, and saw what a wonderful job they're doing of keeping seniors engaged while they age in place. This is something that really points towards institutional care. At some point, there is a desire for folks to move into some sort of a facility that is designed more for seniors than the house that they've been living in for 30 years. So what will institutional care look like? Well, just as we get started with that, let's define what institutional care really means. What the offerings are out there now fall into 3 or 4 basic components. One is independent living, and it's pure housing in an age-restricted setting. It can come in many different forms, either as a part of a continuum of care, as in a continuing care retirement community, or as in just a planned adult community, or in a NORC. That was referred to earlier. A NORC is a naturally occurring retirement community. It's not the policeman that raids your trunk looking for drugs. That's something else. But there are more and more NORCs around the country. They are apartment buildings or housing that have just had folks that have come up in their years. Assisted living is a licensed facility where residents can get help in their ADLs, assistance in daily living, such as dressing and bathing and eating and exercise. The average age of assisted living is probably between 83, 85 years old. Memory care is often considered a branch of either assisted living or nursing. It's moving towards a branch of assisted living. Some of the older nursing home facilities have turned perhaps a wing into memory care just by having a lockdown situation. Point is that for reasons of either behavior or development, the memory care residents really need a separate environment from either assisted living or nursing. And then there's skilled nursing, which often deals with the frailest, the sickest, and the least ambulatory of all residents. Notice we call them residents because no matter which segment of the institutional care they're in, it's still their home. So what will the future of institutional care look like? We think that there will be actually fewer CCRCs developed proportionally to the population and more neighborhood, smaller campuses that deliver a higher level of care, such as assisted living, memory care, and nursing. This is a campus plan of a facility that we've been involved in over the last 10 years in Houston. It has assisted living, memory care, and a nursing home is just about to be constructed. Adjacent to it is a NORC, is an apartment complex where folks have just aged in place. This allows them to stay in their neighborhood, to stay in their community, and continue that continuum of care. This is a campus in Florida, Central Florida, that not where Jerry Seinfeld's parents moved, where we about 10 years ago we did an assisted living and memory care project, and now skilled nursing and independent living are being developed on either side of it, so that there will be a continuum of care. That was driven specifically by this population, and a lot because it is Florida. This is a plan of a larger, probably about I think it's about a 75-acre development outside of Austin, Texas. It's in what was started as a resort development, but the entire community, in essence, has become a NORC. The folks that moved in there in their 30s and 40s have stayed there, and so they want to stay there. In fact, there was a huge push. There was a citizens community initiative to look for a developer for a retirement community. So a client of ours has purchased property down there, and about 10 years ago developed the assisted living and the memory care. Last year opened up a nursing home, and is now doing the bulk of this, which is independent living, but it includes other community services. It includes some retail, it includes a public library, a lot of different things that are happening that keep the neighborhood together. And whether it's in a CCRC or whether it's like the assisted living that's next to the NORC, some of those will be, it's all about keeping folks in their community. The difference is this project has actually taken about, well, if you total the whole thing, it's about 10 years to develop. as opposed to a smaller project with assisted living, which could be done in just a couple of years. Memory care is really coming on strong. A lot of it is because of the programs and the services that are available to help folks with dementia. It used to be a simple lockdown wing of a nursing home, or maybe not even a separate wing. Maybe it was just dementia residents that were mixed in with folks with other issues. What we've been doing probably in the last 4 or 5 years is creating very residential type opportunities for folks with dementia. What's key to this are the programs that are developed with it. We found out in our own family what opportunities there are for slowing down the dementia process. We believe that this trend will continue to develop with a very interesting social model. It's one that we call the fraternity house for old folks. The opportunity is very it's a very open social model where resident rooms open into a common area. There are activities, dining and living all in one larger space that's supervised. It is, I guess, much like a fraternity house, except without 3 inches of beer on the floor, perhaps. Assisted living is something that's changing. We heard about it coming on the market probably 10 to 15 years ago. There was a big boom for that. It's getting a lot more sophisticated in terms of, and as the population gets more sophisticated in terms of their understanding of the different options of the different care levels, we see that the lines are getting blurred between assisted living and independent living. In fact, this is a facility that's just opened up in Green Hills, and I understand this is pretty high end, and we'll get to how that applies to all the different population segments. But it's licensed assisted living and memory care, but it has a lot of 2-bedroom apartments, which has been pretty unheard of in assisted living. The reason is, if folks can afford it, they'll move into it. They'll take a 2-bedroom apartment if they can afford it, and they may not need the services right then, but they've made the change and they're there, and there's no stigma attached to it by getting additional health care services. Again, this is another view of that. A lot of activities. One of the main things that we've seen is when folks do move into assisted living from their own home, if they've lived there by themselves for a while, their health actually improves drastically because of the social factors, because they have care available, whether they actually need it or not. Their nutrition gets better, those sorts of things. The boomers we've already said, are going to demand quality. They will be looking for improved quality of life. This is a rendering that shows an assisted living project that perhaps is like Opryland Hotel with gardens under glass, but it's in a residential setting for assisted living and nursing. This is a skilled nursing, in fact, this is the skilled nursing in Texas from that previous plan, where the community claimed that this was better than the independent living that was being built in other areas. They were actually, in fact, there was a prospective independent living resident that came in here and said he was actually looking forward to moving to this nursing home. This particular nursing home doesn't have a bathing suite, as you might see in a typical nursing home. It has a spa. The only difference is the finishes. It still has a Parker tub or some sort of a apparatus for bathing the residents, but it's done in just a little bit nicer venue. And it really is trying to respect their quality of life and dignity. This is interesting. This is a concept that we've seen actually done in other areas, and we're picking up on this model. Of course, most nursing homes have wings that are double-loaded corridors that are connected in the middle. They're either X-shaped or Y-shaped or T-shaped or some configuration where you come into a main hub and then go down a corridor. They may have a living room at that hub where the residents like to hang out. So that when I go visit Grandma, I can take Grandma to that living room and visit with her while Jeopardy plays in the background way too loud. Or I can sit on the edge of the bed and visit with her in her room. That doesn't particularly make me want to go visit grandma very often because it's not a good setting. So this particular concept takes that hub and develops a town center in place of that. It's the place where those wings might come together. And it's a small recreation of a town with little storefronts, which are actually functional spaces behind those storefronts. One is a multi-purpose room that's labeled as a movie theater, where actually residents can watch a movie. The market is actually a storefront for a prep kitchen. There's a little cafe or an ice cream parlor. There's a beauty shop, all those things that you might see. And the interesting thing is now when I go visit grandma, I can actually go out into that space. I can take her, if she's in a wheelchair, I can wheel her out. I can sit on a park bench and visit with her and have a private conversation with her where I'm not necessarily amongst all the residents. And we've seen this happen. This is happening in a facility that we saw in Kansas. And there are 4 or 5 of the residents that they take there once a day. And they really feel like they're going out shopping or going out outside of the facility. These are some of the ideas that are actually happening now that will change the face of housing even more in the future. And I realize that most of these are private pay options and not everyone can afford them. But I think that many of these concepts have application for other economic situations. It's about quality of life. It's like the NASA and the Saturn V rocket that developed Tyvek exteriors that are now affordable and on everybody's house on the exterior. These are some of the things that will hopefully drive the future of institutional care. I know that long-term care insurance is perhaps hopefully going to be more available in the future. I'm not sure. More emphasis on retirement plans, we've heard that. And I believe that as controversial as it is, the CON process for long-term care affects the quality of life which is delivered to people no matter what their economic status. We're seeing that the nursing care in non-CON states generally seems to be a higher level and more competitive than those states that do have a CON process. They don't actually have more beds, they just have higher quality facilities. So I think the bottom line for housing is this: aging in place should continue to develop to a point with innovations in technology and at-home services. But at the same time, institutional care needs to be there for the needs that go beyond home health care, both social and physical. Thank you.
We certainly want to thank David for highlighting a very large component of the continuum of housing options. And he actually emphasized a point that I want to follow up on and then ask him some questions, and that is that it is about quality of life, very much so. And when you think about all the issues that face us as aging baby boomers, that it becomes more about healthy aging and aging well, because I'm sitting there thinking that I'm on the tail end of the baby boomer generation, and I am a nursing home administrator of 20 years, but neither of those places will be on my top 10 list to go. I will be in the go-go group. For sure. So as we look at the continuum of housing options available, that kind of sounds like the slow-go group, right? Are there any options available in the community now, or any trends for a go-go boomer?
Well, I think there is. We've seen a lot of active adult housing. Not so much in Middle Tennessee, in more of the retirement states, the Seinfelds and that sort of thing. And some of the facilities that we're seeing are actually very moderately priced. The facility in Florida where we were doing adding the independent living and nursing actually is a 45,000 person retirement community. It is an active adult community outside of Ocala, Florida. And it's it was a development. It wasn't a city before the folks started developing it, and it's fairly modestly priced housing. Now, I don't really have a desire to move to Central Florida. If you play golf, it's perfect because for every 250 houses that are built, you get another golf course, and golf is free for the rest of your life. And the houses are fairly modestly priced. It's called villages. Those are cutting edge, and those will begin to, I think, come in other areas that are not looked at as retirement community areas.
Do you see, because one of the things that I noticed in a couple of the presentations of projects that your company has done was that there was this opportunity for you to live independently, and then based on your need for additional services, you may remain right where you were at, or you could transition to other levels of care. Here in the Nashville community, I know you all worked on the Cumberland, and when you look at that, that's kind of like me looking at the website last week at the Lamborghini that debuted at the car show at $1.4 million. Won't be able to do anything but look at it. What are any of those best practices or coming out of those models that are high end that will be transferable to affordable housing that would allow me to live independently, maybe not live in my house that I've lived in for 30 years, but to live independently and then have access to supportive services as I need those, such as housekeeping and maybe somebody going out to get my groceries, or if I did in fact need medical care, then there would be a point that someone that I could access and they would help manage that for me. Are any of those transferable to affordable housing for what I consider to probably be the majority of where the need will be at in the future?
Right. I think that's an interesting point because we do see that the NORCs, the naturally occurring retirement communities, have the opportunity, and some have developed service packages. They don't get into health care because that gets into a licensure thing, but they get into providing meals and providing social activities, those sorts of things. I'm not sure who's going to do it and how it's going to get paid for, but those are probably the easiest way where you can take a community that's already together, like an apartment building perhaps, and develop service packages for those.
Interesting. Okay. Noticed on your slide about the fastest growing segment seems to be assisted living. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that's occurring?
I think, well, part of it is because it's not regulated as heavily. It's easier to do that. It's quicker to do. It's more community-based. It's not as difficult to develop from a neighborhood standpoint. When you talk about trying to develop a nursing home, some neighborhood communities don't particularly like that, and if they're active, they'll try to keep it out. Assisted living, and as we mentioned, the lines are being blurred between assisted living and independent living, so the opportunity to provide something in a smaller community-based facility that actually has those services, we think is going to continue to grow.
Okay. And that smaller size institution for the institutional care, you know, I'm among them. I want to remain outside of that as long as possible. But even for the institutional care, are we seeing a trend towards smaller?
Yes. Okay.
For everything.
Yes.
Okay. Because we want that homey feeling, that community feeling, not that institutional feeling.
The tough part of it is the economics.
The economics.
The smaller it is, obviously, the more difficult it is to fund. It's just an economy of scale.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you to take out your housing crystal ball and giving recognition to the micro and the macroeconomics. We know that smaller costs us more, but we also know as a community that we will have vast numbers of seniors who require housing. And they will also, with housing, will require supportive services. in order to keep them as healthy as possible, to keep them out of the institutional settings that are more costly and are less desirable for everyone. So taking out your housing crystal ball, where would we need to focus our efforts on as a community in order to get prepared? What would be your suggestion?
Well, I think one of the interesting things is developing a mechanism for adding the meals and the socialization and those types of things in existing communities that have older folks in them. I actually think it could kill two birds with one stone in that it could take, what we're seeing is a lot of volunteer help and part-time seniors that are actually helping out in the assisted living and in the nursing care. So we can take the population that's still going to be working and allow them the opportunity to work in those areas to keep folks where they are.
Thank you. Sounds like we have a lot of work to do as a community. We all know that we are a state that is behind the curve as far as home and community-based services are concerned. Everyone, and economically, we as a state cannot afford for everyone to age in place at their current place and make those changes and be able to fund the maintenance of those things and the folks be safe. And you have to look at their entire well-being. And so we do, as a community, have a lot of work to do. First, thinking about it, what are the options that need to be out there? How do we fund those? And then how do we wrap those options with supportive services that allow those individuals to remain as independent as possible and only have to utilize institutional care when absolutely necessary? I think that's the desire of all. So clearly there is a need in our community as far as how do we broaden the continuum of housing options available. And I think you all will agree it's not a new issue. It's about the numbers of boomers that will be coming through the system. Back to this whole topic of healthy aging and aging well, it really is a common thread that runs through every issue relative to the baby boomers growing older. We've heard the statistics about the massive numbers of aging boomers headed toward retirement, and guess what's happening? We also had fewer children. I guess it was all about us, okay? And so we had fewer children, and so that means there's this huge number of folks headed toward retirement, and we have fewer children, and so they're in their workforce, but there's fewer of them to backfill those jobs. And so many employers focusing on the healthy aging are actually being very proactive about trying to extend our longevity in the workforce. And they are also doing some innovative programs to respond to the disconnect between the numbers that potentially could be leaving and those coming in. We have with us Marilyn Debris, the Chief Nursing Officer of Vanderbilt, and also Vita White with Caterpillar Financial to talk to us a little bit today about what their two organizations are doing around this whole aging trend that we're encountering.
Thank you, Vicki. Well, I'm going to take us to a little bit more practical place. So I'd like to invite you to go with me for a second where we're not going to be able to move to a great place yet, but we're going to talk about working. And for some of you, you may think about the nursing shortage or issues about nursing, which is what I want to talk with you about for just a few moments. Veda and I are going to be talking about the employment challenges of baby boomers, not our own, although we have some. We all love talking about ourselves, but we're going to tell you a little bit about our two organizations and the work that we've done. Often when we talk about nursing, what you see in the press is really about the nursing shortage, and you can see why that's happened. You've seen the numbers this afternoon of the aging rates that are going on. Many nurses are in that age group, and in fact the national average age of a nurse is about 47. The average age of a nurse at Vanderbilt is a little bit lower than that. We're at about 43 now, but you could imagine the impact that that has. So as we look at the challenges of doing two things, both caring for a growing aging population and also having the people who are doing that to be aging nurses. So for me and for my colleagues at Vanderbilt, it's quite a challenge to be able to balance those needs. And yet I'd like to tell you a little bit about the case study that we're living in at Vanderbilt. Most of you know a lot about Vanderbilt, I would imagine, if you're in the Nashville area, and I hope many of you that represent organizations in our city today will be able to hear some of the things that we've done, and they might be applicable to the places that you work, and I'm hoping that's what will happen. We are the second largest employer in the city of Nashville after the state of Tennessee. We have over 17,000 employees, and actually 3,000 of those employees are nurses. About 2,200 of them take care of patients on a regular basis. The others are in research and leadership, education, and management. But as you can imagine, with those 3,000 nurses, there are many challenges with that aging workforce. Our focus has been really multifaceted, and it's been geared toward creating the optimal work environment. And you'll hear me emphasize that quite a bit in my remarks this afternoon, because I have a bias that in order to both recruit people into your workforce and to retain them, their work environment has to be really positive. And my bias that I will underscore for you is that as we talk about having a great work environment for baby boomers, that means that we have to have a great work environment for the people that are both younger than baby boomers and for individuals that are older than baby boomers. You can't do, I don't believe, innovations around a work environment that doesn't take into account the entire population and community of the organizations that we attempt to lead. And hopefully you will agree with me about that. We need to have that work environment be a great one regardless of age. And we need to have also the end goal of providing the very best possible patient care in the work that I'm trying to do. That goal that we have, however, is complicated by the first-time occurrence for us at Vanderbilt and in most healthcare organizations, and perhaps in many organizations in this city, of where we have 5 generations of nurses. So in our workforce, for the very first time, we now have nurses who are 20 years old through 68 years old working in our hospitals. There was an article this past weekend about individuals working longer. The picture, the photograph that went along with that article was of a nurse who was 65 years old, and you may have read a little bit about her story. Enjoying work, wanted to work longer, financially needed to work, and in fact, that's the reality that we're experiencing today. We had not too very long ago an individual who was quite a humorous speaker come to talk to us about intergenerational differences in the workforce. The title of her presentation was Intergenerational Differences from Wedding Rings to Nose Rings. It's not quite that bad every day, but I will say that when you have 5 generations of individuals working, one of the challenges in our workforce is that each of those generations bring different values. So as we talk about baby boomers today, one of the things that we've been challenged to do is to not only pay attention to the needs of baby boomers, but to understand that they are struck with and confounded by the values of the 20-year-olds that they work with. And as leaders in our organizations, how do we prepare managers and others throughout the organizations to know how to manage that? We've actually looked to industry best practices for our workforce strategies with an attention to the different developmental needs of these groups and also for their preferences, their desires, and their values as they are novice practitioners, novice employees to individuals who are more senior staff. And I would challenge you to do that in your organizations as well. Individuals who come to us that are at different ages will come with different values and likes and preferences, and they all have to be taken into account to create a workforce that's really productive with itself. These differences exist in a lot of different areas, and I believe you'll hear Veda and I talk about this afternoon in our comments, but just as a high-level view, the differences in values that you should take into account include some of the following. Individuals have different values about their benefits. So, for example, a 20-year-old is not very interested in our retirement plan. They should be. Those of us sitting in this room would encourage them to be interested, but that's not always the first thing on their mind. Our individuals who are in their late 40s and early 50s become very interested in the benefit packages that surround retirement. Scheduling. Scheduling is very important for someone who, as you've heard described today, has children and child issues of their own, as well as issues for their elderly parents. They may have their own health care issues. So having flexible schedules might be very, very important to them. On the other hand, for someone who's 20-year-old, they may be very interested in being able to take off to go to a friend's wedding. They are not so interested in being able to work quite as much as all of us have. Their value of the work ethic, as it's told to me and as I experienced in our workplace, is very different from their colleagues who are 50 years old. And so scheduling is another thing that varies amongst our workforce. The management interaction is also something that's different for this group of staff. For a baby boomer, interacting with their manager, knowing who's leading that department or that area is very important. For someone who's younger, the differences, again, exist for them. They are not so into authority structures, and trying to make sense of that is very complicated for our managers and for their learning needs to know how to work in that kind of environment. Development opportunities. You've heard that baby boomers want to be lifelong learners. We see that as being the case, and I'll talk about that a little bit later this afternoon. But we also know that for some individuals who are younger, they don't want to do that. So again, that conflicting and confounding experience that most of us find that are leading large or small organizations, we're faced with the challenge of working with people who span many generations, and yet we need to pay attention to all of their needs and their values. I'd like to just to underscore for you that I do believe, however, that as we talk about this afternoon, that actually if you look at the values of any one group, being able to do that in the context of looking at the values of individuals actually makes us a better organization, because we try to understand what are the desires and needs of the people who make up the population of the community where we work. Specifically at Vanderbilt, for our ever-growing and older nursing workforce, we've been very mindful to create a really excellent work environment to the extent that we possibly can by paying attention to the following three things. And I've tried to categorize these in the hopes that they might be applicable in your work areas as well. One, we've really tried to pay attention to personal health and lifestyle support. So individuals needing to make sure that they have support themselves for managing their own stress, their own health, being able to manage their issues of family. Sometimes they have their own issues related to abuse and drug issues, just like the rest of the population does. Do we have the resources available to them for that? Secondly, have we created a great professional environment? You heard the comment that baby boomers may not want to stuff envelopes. Well, this is a group that actually wants to be very professionally affirmed in the work that they do. They want to do work that's important. They want to feel important. I feel that way. I think my colleagues do that are also baby boomers. And so creating an environment where the work is valuable and valued is really critical to them. And then the third category is really to create a safe working environment. In a healthcare organization like Vanderbilt, having a safe working environment has a lot of implications. It can be from something as simple as creating something that is infection-free for employees and for patients, trying to do that to the extent possible, to having needleless syringes so that individuals are not injured on the job, and also creating an environment where people ergonomically can be safe. For our baby boomer population, more and more injuries occur, both back injuries, knee injuries. How do we really try to deal with that? So we've created a number of programs in which we have really looked at creating a safe working environment for these employees. Our professional environment is one also that, as I mentioned that to you, I would just say not only do people want to have valuable work to do, but they also want to be valued by their managers. And I mentioned earlier how important having a really talented manager is to deal with these various generations. But for all of us who own businesses or lead businesses, being able to add to the development of our managers so they know how to work with these individuals is really critically important. I think that there are a couple of examples that we can share also about personal and lifestyle support for baby boomers, and a lot of this really relates to the challenges that baby boomers have. You've heard about this earlier in the earlier comments. Baby boomers are faced with having children of their own often. They may have grandchildren that they're raising. They may also have elderly parents. All of them are really in need of having very, very flexible work schedules and the ability to be able to have resources to know how to address those. So as you think about those three categories, personal issues, a professional work environment, and a safe work environment, I hope that those are really applicable to you. And I invite Veda to come and give her comments before we answer some questions.
Ma'am, there are several of us here who are beyond the boomer age, I wonder, in the interest of comfort and necessity, if we could have about a 10-minute, no more than a 10-minute break.
I think you are absolutely on target. I'd say yes.
Sorry.
Look to in the future as it relates to the benefit portion for employees in general. But before I do that, I'm going to do what they call a shameless plug for my organization. Caterpillar Financial is a wholly owned subsidiary of Caterpillar, Inc. We build tractors. The short and skinny of it, Cat Inc. does. And Cat Financial actually finances those deals that we make. So some people look at it as a bank, and in some instances it is, but we do provide financing to customers and dealers who would like to purchase those Caterpillar engines, marine vessels, etc. We were formed in 1981, so we just celebrated 26 years in Peoria, Illinois, and we relocated here to Nashville in 1991. We have about 1,600 employees worldwide and 900 local employees, and we're growing. Some of the programs that we currently have, and I'm going to talk about, will be the flexible work schedules, flexible work arrangements, personal leave, family medical leave, and with family medical leave, I'm not going to go into the wonderful details of FMLA because we will be here all day talking about that. But I just want to highlight a certain part of that will have the impact or things that will be seeing in the future as it relates to time off. And then alternative work arrangements. When we look at flexible work options, we know that these are innovative practices in scheduling when and where and how work is done. We encourage managers to use flexible options both to meet customers' changing needs and to attract and retain our employees. And as you've heard today, the baby boomers are looking for that flexibility. Marilyn mentioned too about how we cannot specifically target any program around a generational concern, baby boomers. We have to look at it from the perspective of how our benefits will impact all of our employees. That's not to say that the baby boomers will not impact how we develop new benefit programs. When we look at personal leaves from Caterpillar's perspective is available to employees that may need to take time off for personal reasons, which may not be covered under other policies like FMLA. They may take this opportunity to take additional trips. They may need to travel, vacation. The downside to that is the fact that it is unpaid, but the fact that you still have that connection to your employer, and it doesn't really impact you not having a job. So that is available to you to do some of the things that you want to do that sometimes work gets in the way. Family medical leave. The Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 and the Tennessee Medical Leave Law requires us to offer benefits to employees meeting eligibility requirements. All of our employees are covered under Family Medical Leave Act, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about that. And then alternative work arrangements. Baby boomers that either have to continue to work or would like to continue to work but need flexibility in their schedules are looking and seeking alternative work arrangements. And that could be things like part-time employment, 4x10s, working 10-hour days, or 9x80s. So again, with these alternative work arrangements, if you do not have them, it should be something that you should consider because, again, you want to retain the talent that you have in the organization. As we heard today, there will be a large group of people leaving the workforce, But there will also be a large group that will be remaining there for different reasons, and we have to find a way to attract them and keep them. In addition to that, some people will prefer to work part-time, and with that part-time arrangement, what type of benefit package, if any, that you will be able to provide to them to maintain that talent within the organization. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Flex time. How many of you have flex time within your organization? Great. Flex time is a work schedule that permits flexible starting and quitting times within limits, of course, set by management. This arrangement may include different hours from traditional office hours or a temporary period of reduced hours. At Caterpillar, our core hours are from 9 to 3. So we prefer that all of our employees be at work between the hours of 9 and 3. But we have people that come in at 6 o'clock. We have people that come in at 9:30, and they stay later. So it allows, again, it allows that individual to have that flexibility in schedules so that, you know, one day they may come in at 9 and the next day they need to come in at 10 because of family issues or family concerns. So again, it all goes back to retention and retaining, attracting and retaining individuals in the organization. And then telecommuting. With technology, and when technology permits, we do allow employees to either work from home or we allow them to telecommute a couple of days of a week. So that means that either they are working from home and they come in, or there's another remote location that they can go to work. That's a huge trend in the workforce industry now because of different reasons. One, because if a company is leasing a facility, they don't own a facility, and they want to reduce some of their operating costs, they allow employees to work from home or have them come into a facility that is closer to where they work. So again, a couple of options within Caterpillar, but again, these will, you will see more and more of these as people stay into the organization longer, or, believe it or not, the other generation, and by the way, I'm not a baby boomer, also are looking for flex time and telecommuting opportunities. Personal leaves, again, at CAT, personal leaves are unpaid, up to 12 weeks to be used at the employee's discretion. We have employees who take this time for extended vacations, travel outside of the country for family matters, care of a friend or family. With FMLA, Family Medical Leave, this again allows employees off in a non-paid status for medical reasons up to 12 weeks. As you've heard today, with a large proportion of baby boomers remaining in the workforce, be prepared to see an increase in the number of requests for family medical leave, not specifically for themselves, but to assist with the care of children or their parents. The family medical leave allows for intermittent time off. Now, what we're seeing at CAT is that we're seeing more and more requests for intermittent time off. Intermittent time off meaning they don't need the full 12 weeks. They just need, 2 days out of the week every quarter or every month to attend to whatever family medical situation that they have going on. So I think there will be an increase in that intermittent part of the FMLA policy, which is going to cause a lot of headache for the HR people out there, because a lot of that is not really defined. So HR people, if you're out there, be prepared to work a little bit harder on those intermittent leaves. And then we have part-time. Now, this is one of the areas, this is really the area from a CAT financial perspective that I'm really disappointed in, but I'm working on that. Currently, we have individuals that work part-time throughout our organization. But the one thing about our part-timers, we do not offer benefits to our part-time people. And so, although we have a handful of people that, and I literally mean a handful of people, that work part-time, it's very difficult for people not to be able to work and not have benefits. And in the future, for baby boomers and older workers, they will come back into the workforce by re-careering. You know, they may not have worked in a financial organization like Cat Financial, but they may want to come in and say, you know what, I have skills and abilities, and I want to learn something new, and I want to be able to come into your organization, but I don't want to do it on a full-time basis. So we need to, again, have these things in place so that we're able to attract the best talent out there to the organization. So that's one of our areas that we will need to work on in the future. Some of the trends that I see in the future would be paid time off, or PTO banks. PTO banks allow for a certain number of days off per year to use without having to take vacation time or sick leave. Many companies offer personal time that you may use in hourly increments to use any way that you like. Other companies use PTO banks to place all of your paid time off, including personal, vacation, and sick time. The PTO allows flexibility and removes managers from making a decision whether or not to allow a time off for a person, and to not be able to inadvertently or advertently discriminate against a person. Because as Marilyn talked about, you have 4 generations of people in the workforce, and many of those people, if you're looking at, say, the Gen Xers or the Gen Ys who may not have children, and they want to take time off to go to a ball game or go be with a friend, versus, say, a baby boomer or older employee who needs time off to attend to a sick child or family member. So we have to make sure that we are consistent in how we approach that. And recently the EEOC came out with some information about not having a disparate impact on those individuals who are taking those time off for family matters, and companies allowing that, but not allowing, say, the younger workers to do the same. So with PTO banks, it may help alleviate some of that. Alternative work arrangements, we talked about that earlier, but again, it just allows more flexibility in the schedules and the time that an employee would need off for certain times. Now, mostly with 4x10s, people want to take Fridays off or Mondays, but that's not necessary. I mean, some people like to take Wednesdays off because it breaks up 2 days, and then you have a Wednesday off, and then you have another 2 days, and then you have the weekend. So those are options that, not specific to baby boomers, but for all employees across the board, that we are probably going to see a trend in that increasing if you're not seeing that now. And then the last thing would be additional time off in lieu of extra pay. And I thought this was quite interesting. From our organization, we've had many of our older workers come and say, you know what, for recognition purposes, I really don't want you to give me money. Can I have another day off? Okay, and so we're seeing a lot of that for a retention and engagement perspective. Many employees or employers are looking at as an employee appreciation sort of thing, to allow a half day off to do with it whatever you want to. So I think what we will see is more ways of trying to attract, retain, and engage the employee while they're there. And again, this crosses all levels of employees, not just the baby boomers. But we do know that you baby boomers will have a huge impact on the way our benefits will be structured in the future. Thank you.
we certainly want to thank Marilyn and Vita for highlighting what their two organizations are doing. You know, to kind of sum it up, what I hear from both of them is that what we're seeing happen on the workforce, in the labor market, as far as from the employer's perspective, is creating that culture that will meet the needs of every generation, but certainly giving recognition to the fact that you've got a very large component of that workforce that is represented by aging boomers. And so it sounds like we're going to have, what we're seeing occur over the next years, and it's already started, is maybe a less rigid work environment than we're used to. You know, used to be it was 5 days from 8 to 5. If you couldn't do that, you need to find you another job. So I think we're probably seeing a less rigid employer relationship environment being nurtured, with a focus on what Marilyn mentioned about personal lifestyle, about professionalism, and about safety. Along those lines, I have a question about Vanderbilt and their aging nursing workforce, and keeping those three in mind, and this whole idea of creating a culture. What specific initiatives have been launched at Vanderbilt in response to the aging nursing workforce that you've actually seen be useful across the entire culture?
Well, there are a couple of things, and I'll mention two. One of the things that we noticed several years ago was an increase in our workers' comp claims for aging nurses, and they weren't necessarily nurses in their 60s, but they were nurses in their 40s and sometimes even their 30s. But again, as I mentioned earlier, more knee injuries, more back injuries, and that number was continuing to grow. And as we investigated that, we discovered that a lot of those injuries were certainly brought on by age. Some of them were brought on by poor health in general of the individual, but many of them were accelerated by the need to be lifting or moving patients that were very heavy. They didn't have the right equipment. So as you might expect at a place like Vanderbilt, so we did a study and looked to see, well, what was the right thing to do, and we looked at where people were doing that really well. Interestingly, the Tampa VA has some of the best work going on around safe patient handling, which, oh, by the way, is really better for our patients. But we implemented that program a year ago, January, and in the first 9 months of that program, we decreased our workers' comp claims by 60%. So for those of you that are sitting here and have businesses or want to make sure that people can continue to work and also avoid a cost outlay that is not the way you'd like to spend your money, I would say, for that safe environment piece, that was really great for baby boomers, but oh, by the way, it was great for that 25-year-old as well, and it involved creating an ergonomically safe patient handling program. A second one I would mention is really something that's pretty specific to nursing and to healthcare, but I think it's applicable to other organizations, and it's benefited our whole organization. A number of years ago, actually with the help of people that are in this room, we implemented a shared governance model at Vanderbilt for our nurses and clinical staff, but one in which we really engaged individuals, particularly staff, in making decisions about clinical care. And I would just offer that kind of involvement with staff is very beneficial to individuals who want to engage in decision making about work, but it obviously benefits everyone in the workforce. We were awarded a grant by HRSA to evaluate that program prior to our getting our magnet status, which Vicki mentioned a moment ago. And I think it's that type of approach, that involvement of staff, is really something that is very beneficial and is very transferable throughout an entire organization, regardless of age.
Thank you. Vita, I don't know if you read Saturday's paper or not, but there was an article in the paper, in the Saturday Tennessean, that said more seniors stay on past retirement. That was my Saturday morning reading with the Starbucks. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you, are you experiencing this trend in your organization? And even if you're not, what do you see as some pros and cons associated with that trend?
Yes, we are seeing more seniors staying into the workforce, which is a good thing, and we like to highlight that. And that is because of the brain drain, I guess. We don't want to lose that talent. We don't want to. They're very highly skilled individuals, and so we know that there will be a gap if those persons leave our organization. So we really want them to stay in the organization. The con in that is, and I don't know if it is from the standpoint of, from an employment standpoint, but the quality of life from an individual who has been working so long and having the desire to stay there. Are they staying there because they have to versus staying there because this is something that they really enjoy? So that would be the downside from my perspective, is making sure that they have that quality while they're there and wanting to be there versus having to be there.
Question, is there any risk associated with staying too long?
Sure. Well, I mean, yes, it is, and it's from the probably from the standpoint of, I shouldn't say morale, but from some of the other generations may indicate that this person should retire because I want their job. Okay. And we can't push anyone out the door, of course, but it's not really. I think it's one of those decisions. We have to realize it's one of those decisions that person has to make.
Okay.
And we can't force them to leave.
Okay.
Now, the thing about it, let me put this little caveat. If there's some diminishing skills, we still have to treat that as a performance concern, and that way. So that would be the drawback for staying in the role too long.
Okay. You both have talked about what I consider some wonderful programs that really respond to the need of the sandwich generation that has the children that they're trying to take care of, as well as senior parents that they may also be trying to manage. And when you kind of think about those two groups of folks that a sandwich generation individual is trying to manage, they both have very similar needs. And you talked a lot about the FMLA and the personal leave. Do you see there being even more growing, more options available to respond to those needs for time off and that flexibility?
I think from the perspective, to me, it's common sense. We don't need laws to say this is what you need to do. It's common sense. If you have an individual, a good performing individual, you need to accommodate them. And if that person is 65 or that person is 25, you need to allow them that flexibility for that time being, because if you do that, there's some loyalty that comes with that. And it's like, you know what, I had this situation going on and this company stood by me, supported me through it. And when you do that, they go out and tell other people about the organization. And they're very positive, and they're very engaged, and they'll do whatever they need to do for that organization.
Okay. Well, it sounds like both of your organizations would be great to work for. One last question for each one of you. You have talked a great deal about your organizations, and they sound like absolutely wonderful places to work. Very employee friendly, regardless of whether you're the 20-year-old or you are the 60-year-old. You're very proactive in trying to respond to their individual needs. What are your organizations doing, each of your organizations doing, to push these same concepts out into the community? Is there some mechanism for that to occur?
I'll take a pass at that. I think there are a couple of things that actually Veda just touched on that are really important for those of us that are sitting in the room and trying to look at how do you create great organizations to work, and if you do that, how are you impacting the community in which you live? If we have a great organization, and so let's assume that we're working to do that, you do want people to go back to their churches, to the stores they go to their own communities and say, that is a great place to work and this is why. And sometimes that's the best advertisement for any of us, but it's also the way to make the greatest change, because people hear a great idea, like hopefully people are today. Sometimes for us, it's also having conversations like this where we say, healthy aging, for at least for us, was my Vanderbilt hat on, healthy aging is really about healthy living. So how do we really support in our community things that actually make all of these things come to bear for us each day? So how do we have great opportunities in our community to actually support healthy living? And for us, that's supporting both great health and really good illness care, as well as looking at genomics and what's in the future for health. But I believe it's something about really sharing all that information.
I agree. Caterpillar is a organization that thrives on community service, and it's almost like one of everyone's goals. There are certain things that we do each year to support, like United Way, March of Dimes, etc. But there are individuals who volunteer for different organizations within the community, and if they need anything from Caterpillar Financial, we are very supportive of that. It's just the thing you have to do is just ask, and if you need it, 9 times out of 10, we will help in any way that you need. So we're very conscious of that.
And you're probably having a much broader impact than you really have probably announced or highlighted today, because when you think about it, it's almost like the pay it forward principle. If I do something for you, and then for 4 people, and those 4 people go out and do something for 4 other people, when you are promoting that healthy living principle with that one employee, and they are an employee in a home of 4, then hopefully that is translating to those 4 people that live in that home. And so then as we look and years go by, then maybe we won't have as many health issues, and then we all, more people will be able to live independently, and we won't have the challenges that we do in Tennessee around diabetes and congestive heart failure, because we'll all be walking the mile or 2 a day and eating less fat, less fried chicken, and all those things. So really and truly, when you think about it, if your employer, as an employer, if you are engaged in promoting healthy living, it is having a much broader impact beyond just your employee base that has an impact on all the issues that we're talking about. Really and truly it does. Because healthy aging and aging well and making sure we do that a little bit better than we've done it in the past, because we all want to hold on to our independence as long as possible, because despite the fact that these great institutions are available, we don't want to go there. We really don't. So keeping in mind healthy aging and aging well, I'm just being real frank about that. Your surveys, Ms. Kelly talked about the surveys of boomers. They don't want to go there. And it may be unrealistic, but they really don't want to go there. But when we talk about healthy aging and aging well, that brings up the huge topic of access and financing of health care. So regardless, I don't care, you talk about aging well, all discussions, all solutions, all strategies go back to this whole issue of, do I have access to good health care? Because I may be 20 years old now. If I don't have access to good health care, by the time I'm 50, I may have the body of a 70-year-old. And I present the same challenges to this community as if I were 70 years old. And so access to health care and financing of health care is probably the largest challenge that we have before us. Warren is going to talk to us a little bit about the current trends related to financing health care. And I think he's going to try to stimulate our thought processes about potential opportunities. Okay.
I'd like to think that they save the best for last, but I really know better. Most people, when we start talking about healthcare finance or finance in general, I think would really prefer to go to the dentist and have their tooth pulled. It kind of makes me remember a story going back about 10 years ago when my son was in high school, and he's at college now, and he was taking an accounting course, and he came home and he was sitting at the table, and I could just see him pondering some thoughts, and he looked up at me and he said, "If I had to do what you do every day, I'd kill myself." So Needless to say, he's not an accountant. So with that as a backdrop, I've been in healthcare 30 years, and I started healthcare as soon as I graduated college. So yes, I'm 52, and yes, I'm also a boomer. And you know, we talk a lot about healthcare reform, and it's not like healthcare reform is new. They were talking about healthcare reform in 1977, and they've been talking about it every year since 1977. And I think I have seen probably 5 or 6 cycles of healthcare reform. Now, all of you probably haven't seen much of it because you don't feel it and see it every day. You think of healthcare as I need it when I want it, and it just better be there. And you feel it in terms of, you know, money out of your pocket, but you don't really see and touch the other side. Healthcare reform in this country has really been about how do we pay providers less. It has not been really about how to reform the whole system. And even today, we're going through another cycle in Washington about how to pay providers less. And unfortunately, a lot of my work is about how to tell the government they shouldn't be providing less money to providers. And it's the same cycle that we continue to be in. So in terms of if we were able to start over again and create a system from scratch, this is not the system we would have. And unfortunately, it's easier said than done to get a system to start over again. When you look up at this chart, one of the things that you'll see is that you see consumers at the bottom. And you all are consumers of healthcare. And then kind of work your way up the chart, and what you see are providers, and that's what I am. I work for Vanderbilt Hospital, and we are a provider. And then on top of that, you have the innovators, and Vanderbilt is also an innovator because we're an academic center. But you've got pharmacy companies, biotech companies, device companies, and on top of that, you've got all the watchdogs, the administrators and the regulators. In every one of those definitions, boxes, whatever you want to call them, everybody has their own self-interest. So if we go to Washington and we try and change something, everybody's got their own lobbyist. So you can't change because if you tweak one thing, you're tweaking somebody else. And whoever can lobby the hardest usually is the one that wins. So the system continues to come back to how do you pay money, less money to providers because that's easier. We don't take benefits away from people. What we do is that we take money away from those who provide the service. If you take a look at this little roadmap, and I won't explain it to you, but there's a lot of things on this roadmap, and unfortunately, this is the way healthcare works. Everybody's connected someplace, and you're kind of just going in circles, going in circles, going in circles, and this is the way we're connected, and again, you've got all these self-interests. But then you look up at the top, and you also have to sit back and say we have 1,300 payers, we've got 3,000 major codes, things that people come into a hospital, go see their doctor, something is wrong, and we have it coded. But even more so, we got 2.8 million pages of regulations. That's more regulation than the tax code. And how many of you like the tax code? Okay, well, you sure aren't going to like this if you're taking a look at it. And that's what makes this industry very, very hard, is dealing with this amount of regulation. What's interesting, in 1996, the government came out with the Health Insurance Portability Act, also known as HIPAA. And HIPAA, many of you know today because it talks a lot about patient confidentiality. Well, the part that you really don't know is that that was actually one of the largest pieces of regulation that reduced payments to hospital in the history of this country. Okay, that part isn't known. What is known is about the patient confidentiality. So what ended up happening is that a lot of money was taken away from us, and then, oh, by the way, you need to be adding all of this administrative cost. Lots of cost because we have to comply with HIPAA. So the way I would equate it is Your boss comes in and says, guess what? You get to work 10 hours more a week, and we're going to cut your salary by 10%, and be happy about it. That's what HIPAA did in 1996. And again, that's one of the struggles that providers have when we start talking about healthcare finance. So we know healthcare is expensive. We take a look at where we were back in 1980, and now we see where we are in 2005. It's very expensive. Taking a look at who pays for healthcare, well, 45 cents of every dollar is paid by the government. Okay, so we know that the government is really the largest single payer. How do they pay that? They're paying that from taxes. So when we think about it, you know, who here does not think we should have better access to health care? Everyone's going to raise their hand. And if I ask the same question, who here would like to pay more taxes? And I don't think we're going to get anyone to raise their hand. So here's the conundrum. The government's the largest provider, and the way they get money to provide more is through paying taxes, or for us paying taxes. And there becomes the beginning of the struggle. So then we take a look at how our healthcare dollars spent. And really, I think the most significant thing is the outside boxes to the right. What we have are 87% of all medical claims are generated by 25% of the population. And that, again, is another part of the problem in terms of what is happening and why it's happening in those two sectors. And then we take a look at it from the employer perspective. And employers know what they are dealing with healthcare insurance premiums. You take a look at this, what they're currently paying per employee out in 2004 was $6,679 in healthcare premiums per employee. Average growth rate from 1994 of 16.67%. One of the reasons why employers are really trying to do more cost sharing with employees, and why they are in fact, in some instances, cutting insurance altogether. It's just becoming a very, very expensive item and hurting their P&Ls significantly. When we take a look at the chart here, and specifically the line that looks most like a Vanderbilt V, taking a look at in terms of health insurance premiums, one can see that back in 1988, we had double-digit growth in health insurance premiums. It started to decline in the mid-90s, and by no accident have they gone back up, because 1996 was when we implemented HIPAA. And the government basically told providers it's time to be cost sharing back to private insurance. So that is what we did. And so now the premiums being paid to private insurance have started to creep back up because government has been taking more and more money away from the healthcare system. So there's only a single dollar in the system, and it's either going to come through taxation, and if they redirect taxation, then the only other way of doing it is to get it from the private insurers, and private insurers in turn then start charging higher premiums, and then you see the line going back up. So that's been the cycle, and that's probably been the cycle since 1977 when I started in healthcare. So this chart here is to kind of show what actually has been going on in the United States compared to other countries. If we take a look at the left as the average spending on health per capita, and that dark blue line is the United States. So we spend the most of all the really developed countries, and then you take a look at the line on the right, and of course total expenditures on health as a % of our gross domestic product. So there is a lot of money in the system, there is a lot of money being spent, and there probably will be a lot of money that will continue to be spent. Medicare. Medicare is obviously in trouble and has been in trouble, and that's why we keep changing the rules of how to pay less out in Medicare dollars. Here you can see the step function of what's been going on, and in 2015 we're expecting to see $817 billion spent on Medicare. Very, very significant number. And when you compare it to what we were doing in 1970, you know, I can't do the math here in my head, but that's a lot of growth. Taking a look at it as a function of the gross domestic product, by 2080, it's expected to be 13.9%, and right now we're running at about 3.7. So that is obviously a function of the aging, which you all have heard a whole lot about, but it's also about the some of the unhealthy trends going on in the United States population and the cost of health care and what is happening with the general health of people. So one of the things that we will all be concerned about as boomers is that the Medicare Hospital Insurance Trust Fund will be exhausted in 2019 based on the current growth rates. And the Social Security reserves will be exhausted in 2041. I was hoping to still be alive in 2041, so that doesn't make me feel good that it's no longer going to be there. You've seen this information with regard to the number of people age 65 and older has been discussed quite a bit. Clearly, as we get out into 2010, we're looking at 13% of our population. By 2050, it's 20% of the population. Very significant and will have a dramatic effect on healthcare. I didn't include it here in my chart, but one of the things which really hit me is that by 2050, 11% of the elderly over 65 will be age 90 and above, which was staggering to me. And 3.4% of that was going to actually be over 100. So this is kind of an interesting chart which kind of shows where we've got some issues in our healthcare system. So we're taking a look at what has happened in terms of the change in spending related for certain health conditions between 1987 and 2000. So if we take a look at the very first line that says heart disease, just to kind of explain it, we see that as a percent of the increased change in spending. So the first column says 26,228. Of that increase in spending, 68% related to cost increases. 1.1% and just indicated in terms of a rise in prevalence in the population, and then 30.3 related to the increase in the population. But now you go below that and you see things like pulmonary conditions, the rise in prevalence, 41.9%, mental disorders, 59.2%, cancer, 27.4%, hypertension. Then you see diabetes down below, 49.8%, back problems, 52.6%. Many of these conditions are actually preventable with good preventive care and good wellness. And unfortunately, our country, although we've talked a lot about it, that personal accountability to actually do it is not something that's inbred in our culture. One of the things going on because we're aging and because people are sicker is that we're going to need a lot more beds. So by 2027, compared to 2002, we will be needing to add close to 240,000 new hospital beds in this country. That's a lot of beds, and that's a lot of new cost in the system. At the same time, one of the things going on is the aging of our physician workforce. So when you take a look at where we were in 1985 in terms of the workforce and now where we are in 2005, our physician workforce is getting older. And I think part of that is that there's also a misconception that going in and being a physician is financially lucrative. And my mom is still alive. She's 78 years old, and she's living up in New Jersey. And I always remember as a little boy, being a little boy, she always used to say, be a doctor. They make a lot of money. Okay, that's what she used to say all the time. Now I'm in the healthcare field, and I'll tell you, that's not the reality. Most physicians, if they're going through college, medical school, they do their residency, they build up hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt while they're in medical school. They have the joy during the residency of working 80 hours a week. Basically, the salary they get paid is equivalent to about $10 an hour. It's, in effect, in some ways, not even a living wage. And then if they want to specialize, they may have to do 2 or 3 years as a fellowship. So now, before they even really start to make any money, they're in their mid-30s, and they're in debt up to their eyeballs. And then they work like heck to try and get out of it. It's not a real attractive way of starting life. And I think these numbers begin to indicate one of the trends that we have to deal with is how do we encourage younger people to stay in, become physicians, and how do we make it so that it's not something that they're penalized for, so that we have the appropriate kinds of caregivers as we all age. Uninsured, big problem. You can see from this chart, I know it was mentioned earlier, we have 47 million people right now in this country who are uninsured. As a percentage, it hasn't really changed all that much from 1987. It is obviously, though, getting a lot more attention, but as a percentage of the population, there isn't that much of a difference. In Tennessee, we have 700,000 who are considered uninsured. That's not much different from the national average as a percent of the population, but it doesn't make the situation any better. When we start taking a look at premiums, and just focus in that box on the right, for all of us here, because of what is happening with care to the uninsured, individual premiums for people who are paying for insurance are going up $422 between 2005 and 2010. So each of our premiums will be impacted because of what we are having to provide for care for the uninsured because they don't have access and don't have the funds to pay for it. When we take a look at what our commitment is in terms of cost of care for the uninsured, and this is here just in the state of Tennessee, we will be providing $1.2 billion of care for people who are uninsured. A very significant commitment, and we need to remember that that commitment is being made by primarily hospital providers. Now I say that because that's where the biggest bulk of the cost is. Physicians are obviously providing that care, but the larger component of the cost is sitting in hospitals. So there's a lot of new trends being kicked around as part of this healthcare reform. Pay for performance is one of them. This talks about, giving more money if you perform well. I mean, the fact is that there's not a whole lot of money in the game. There's not enough of incentive to take on all the administrative costs associated with it. People are talking about consumer-directed health care plans. That's great if you have the money to direct there. A lot of people, unfortunately, don't have the kind of cash reserves that you can just stick in the bank in hope that you might use it as part of your consumer-directed health plan. And that requires you to set up your own savings account. And as we heard earlier, most people in this country are not good savers. So saving money in a consumer-directed health plan, although it's a great idea, is not going to help the larger part of the population. Transparency is another item that's real hot nowadays, and that basically is saying have hospitals, doctors disclose what they're going to be charging an insurer or a person for what they do. That's great in theory, but as you can see from this chart here, most people want to go to their doctor and have the doctor make their decisions for them, and they're not making decisions based on price. They're going based on who they trust and where they think they're going to get the best care. I personally don't think pricing transparency is one of those things that's going to really change much. I know when I'm sick, I'm going to go to the person who I think can provide me the best care. I'm not going to the person who's going to provide me the cheapest care. I want the best regardless of price. I don't know how others feel, but that is the way I've always kind of taken that approach as it relates to my health care. So, sure. I mean, there's clearly a lot of movement in that direction, and there's a lot of discussion about it. In the same way we've talked about regulations and how it influences finances, how they can figure out how to design that so that you as a consumer can figure it out. I'm a little perplexed by it. I know the industry, and I can't figure out enough about it. I just can't imagine those who are outside of it who can figure it out. So you are right, that's what we're talking about, but I just don't know how it plays. So in summary, one of the things going on in healthcare, costs are too high and rising too fast. We've got quality problems. Medical errors occur at high rates. There's an amazing gap in terms of what we know and what we do. Variability in practice is huge. We've got proven medical advances take years to be widely implemented. And, from my own perspective, and this is a little bit more of me talking than just the obvious facts, is that we do have a lack of individual accountability for healthy lifestyles and a belief that access to free health care is their legal right, regardless of personal decision making. So, anyway, I am in conclusion.
We certainly want to thank Warren. This is actually a topic that deserves weeks of conversation. And obviously, we've been talking about it in this country for years now. But obviously, it still represents a challenge. It is potentially a huge issue as the boomers move toward retirement and their impact on the Medicare financing system, and also the uninsured. And also those two groups hitting our healthcare system at the same time. Couple of quick questions for Warren. If you had to select three of the, I'm going to call them negative characteristics of our current healthcare financing system that represent future opportunities for the development of a new, better model, which three would you pick?
Well, I'm not sure I can tell you whether or not it would lead to a better model, but I think the things that are wrong in the system is clearly everything is about cost shifting. It is taking from one place and having to get it from another, and unfortunately, that ends up leading to what I'll just call a lot of busy work. If the feds say we're taking it away, then I invest my next contracting effort with Blue Cross of grabbing it from them. So we really need to think about that aspect of it. I've mentioned personal accountability. We need to be thinking through processes and systems and even with employers. What is an employer's obligation related to the status of health of their employees? And trying to put some incentives in the system based on healthy lifestyles, that not every employee has the same fiscal responsibility based on the fact that, I might be a drinker, a smoker, I love to eat McDonald's every day, I've got high fat content, and I have the same healthcare premium as the person who's the triathlete, has the best health indicators, and we need to be thinking about that, because people will respond if it's going to impact them financially. And as I think about that, two of the things that hit me the most are probably those features.
Okay. Interesting. And again, highlighting this common thread that runs through all of these issues that impact seniors and this growing population has to do with healthy aging and aging well. And that is truly an individual responsibility, but as a community, we have also a responsibility to create those resources to make those things available and to educate people about those things.
There is probably, Vicki, I'm sorry, there's probably one other thing that I do need to mention, because I think it's important, especially in our own community, and you trigger the thought when you mention the uninsured. We don't have a normal distribution of the uninsured across the community. And we've got to create processes and mechanisms so that everybody plays in the care for the uninsured. Our system today basically assumes that our safety net hospitals will be the provider of last resort for the uninsured. And we don't have a real good mechanism to have all physicians across the state participating in providing a certain level of care to the uninsured. Physicians, and I'm not trying to speak down here, but physicians can make decisions to not play or participate. And because they can, it has a ramification as to how individual people get their care.
Okay. And we're moving toward the end, but there's one last question, and I really have to ask you because I think it's very important in this forum. There's a great deal of synergy at a national level, at a state level, and also at a local level related to rebalancing long-term care, particularly here in the state of Tennessee. What lessons do you feel we need to take away from our experience here in Tennessee with rebalancing our Medicaid system and doing the TennCare program, and then the subsequent rebalancing we had to do of that great initiative? Are there any lessons we should take away from that as we focus on rebalancing long-term care?
Well, let me preface my comments in saying that we, as Vanderbilt, believe that the governor did a really good job in his plan for rebalancing TennCare, and we were very supportive of that. Unfortunately, because of time, and there was an immediacy issue, especially with federal implementation, that there was not an opportunity for either planning, communication, collaboration on how to deal with the fallout of those who had insurance today but would not have insurance tomorrow. And the communications around that were at best poor. And what ended up happening is that the providers needed to create their own communication tools to let individuals know where were their public clinics that they could go to, where could they actually access, indigent drug programs, how could that in fact happen? And of course there was a pretty long gap, and I think that's a big lesson because that had an immediate impact on a large population. Now subsequently, as we know, the governor implemented Cover Tennessee, and Cover Tennessee is a good starting point for people who do not have access to any insurance to at least now have access to wellness and preventive care. And I think that's an important first step. It does provide some hospital benefit. It's not significant, but again, if we go by the thought here that by having access to wellness and preventive care, you're going to prevent those hospital-related injuries or needs, it's a good beginning.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Hopefully this afternoon we have been successful in enhancing your awareness about what we consider the impending aging crisis that our community, our nation is about to face. We've talked about housing. We know that here in the state of Tennessee that there is a huge focus on institutional care. And there is a desire to grow home and community-based services. There's a desire to age in place. There's a need for that end of the spectrum, the institutional care. We see assisted living growing. I think we will continue to see it grow. However, we have some missing pieces. And as a community, as a nation, we have those missing pieces, particularly here in this area. We've heard about employment, the workforce. We've heard about what 2 local organizations are doing in a very proactive way to create a culture for all age groups, but being particularly sensitive to the boomers. We've heard about the financing of health care. Clearly large opportunities there as we look at that common thread that flows through aging well and healthy aging, having an impact on where we land at. Can we continue employment? Where do we want to live at? That is impacted by our level of independence. And certainly the access to health care is huge. But again, some personal ownership in that, in maintaining our health. I call this a crisis. It is not unlike Y2K in my mind, which had the potential of being a crisis. With Y2K, we had only our statistical models and projections to predict what could happen. And we took those items, those tools, and we actually took action. We got together in our communities, in our companies, and we actually took those statistical models and we started doing gap analysis. Where are the gaps at? What are the opportunities for improvement? And what are some possible strategies to close those gaps? And as a result of that, Y2K, we all set up, nothing happened, okay? But it was because we took action. So we're here today to ask you to join us in moving to action in response to the aging boomer crisis that we see as a potential crisis. But believing that we will do like we've done with Y2K, that we will come together as a community and we will take this journey together, that we will also be able to avoid that crisis as well, that we as a community will be prepared. This is a new journey. There is nothing out there like this before for us to use as a benchmark, so we will be treading new ground. To take no action was not an option with Y2K, and to take no action in response to the growing aging population is unacceptable, and we won't do that either. We will have to work collaboratively in our communities to assess the current state and readiness of us to meet what we see is that growing aging population and to close those gaps. We are here today to ask you to join us in following a similar Y2K process. It will take each of you as individuals in your respective organizations and us collaboratively as community leaders to respond to this. So one of the things we want to ask you to do is to leave your business card with your email address, or if you didn't bring a business card, there should be a sheet in your folder that you received when you registered. If you'll fill that contact information out with your email address and leave it with us, what we would like to do is to send you an electronic survey for your completion. We want you to begin to think about your organization and how does this aging trend impact your organization? How is it already impacting your organization, and how are you responding to it? There's one thing for sure, we're getting older. I mean, we spend millions of dollars, billions of dollars on trying to maintain our youth. And we will continue to do that, but it is inevitable. Despite our best efforts, we will grow older. As a first step, we want you to go back to your respective organizations and ask yourself one question. How could the demographic trends highlighted today impact my organization internally as well as externally? And if you could put that information on the survey and return it to us, we greatly appreciate it. We have a few minutes left over, and we'd like to entertain questions from the audience. Yes.
I have two questions. First, I'd like to ask the lawyer what you all are doing in response to the personal responsibility of health care as far as benefits are concerned. And the second question is, in light of the Social Security doom and gloom, you and I aren't going to have any when we get there. I read something recently that caused a paradigm shift because we are working longer, we're paying into the system longer, is that not going to change how long that money lasts?
So, well, I can speak to the Vanderbilt incentive for personal choice, and Warren, if I mess this up, you can help me since you hopefully participate in this. Vanderbilt, I think, really knows that it's important for us to make really good choices, and our Human Resources Department, with the leadership, established a program that's called Go for the Gold. So it was Go for the Gold, and Go for the Gold essentially works like this. If an individual completes a health risk assessment annually, their premium is decreased by, is it 5%? You get $5 a month?
You get
$10 a month off of your premium. And then there are levels. So there are escalating levels that you can then complete each year. So in order to participate in the program at all, you just complete a health risk assessment. That assessment gives you advice about you should up your activity, eat more vegetables, sort of the healthy choice things, and you get a decrease in your premium. If you make a commitment to do things, this is all in the honor system and it's all done online. If you then, within the year, show evidence that you increased your exercise program, you changed your dietary habits, you managed your stress, then you get an additional amount of your premium decreased by month. So we've tried to do that. It's not a huge thing, but $10 a month for some people, for a lot of people, that's a benefit, and it also applies to their family members. So if it's a spouse, there's a spouse of an employee, it applies to their benefit as well. So they can participate in that program.
Caterpillar also has the same program. It's called Healthy Balance. It doesn't decrease different levels, but it is a decrease in premium of $75 a month for you and your family members, but you do have to do that assessment.
One of the other things, too, because you mentioned benefits, I'd say maybe 3 to 4 years ago, Vanderbilt started a program where every employee must participate in the retirement plan. And Vanderbilt has a very generous retirement plan in terms of its matching formula. Not that I'll go into the details here, but with every employee participating in it and the match, from day one of participation, the employees are vested. So by doing that, now we have 100% participation. Prior to doing that, even though we had even though the plan was available, we only actually had about 30% of all of our employees who participated in it, even though you had a very generous matching formula. So we felt that was a very important addition.
And the
I'll just say,
part of our question you're going to answer?
Just say a word about Social Security. I think you raise a good point. We are concerned about the solvency of Social Security. We believe if we act now that we can have a real impact, and if we go ahead in the next few years and take care of some things, that it will be solvent for several decades to come. Yours is one solution. Another solution, AARP is very concerned about carving a single dollar out of the current system. We believe if we begin to give people the opportunity to take money out of Social Security, that will erode what we have right now. So we are very emphatic about that not being a solution. But the one you mentioned is one solution. Another one is raising the limit on wages that are taxed for Social Security. If we increase that from the current level of $90,000 tax to about $150,000, the first $150,000 of the pay being taxed, you get to about 97% of all employees paying into the system. And that alone will help it become solvent for several decades to come. We also are looking at the way we spend our trust fund dollars, and if we could be a little riskier with how we invest the trust fund, then we could close the gap in a big way. Again, I encourage you to talk to your members of Congress. It lies at the feet of our elected officials at the national level, and we're very concerned about the current gridlock in that arena.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
This is a question from Mr. Beck. Several weeks ago on this very stage, we had the Comptroller General of the United States, David Walker, and members of other various national organizations, liberals, conservatives, and the general theme was the outrageous cost of health care. And I used the figure 15-something%, and Mr. Walker corrected me. He said it's 16% and going up. Now in Canada, it's 10% of the gross domestic product. I didn't hear you say a word about national health care, universal health care, whatever you want to call it. Why didn't you?
Well, when I first came into healthcare back in 1977, in 1980, I had all my healthcare experience in New Jersey, and New Jersey was the first all-payer state that actually adopted a national healthcare philosophy. One of the things that was very distressing from 1980 to 1988 is that at the end of that 8-year period, if you took a look at the condition of hospitals in New Jersey, okay, they were run down, they were undercapitalized. In fact, it was probably one of the poorest systems around. When I came to Nashville, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, because it was exactly the opposite in terms of the well, but every
You look at Canada, you look at France, you look at Britain, you look at other developed countries, they have national health care, and it's far cheaper than ours, and everyone is covered.
Well, the one difference in all of those situations, and of course I'd have to ask all of you, because in all of those situations, they all have to wait for their health care. So if you're willing to wait for your health care, okay, you know, it's around personal decision making, and they all have to wait for their health care. And that's just something from my own vantage point that is not satisfactory to me.
Well, clearly, I believe that there are other models in other nations that we can look to for best practices as we look to redesign the healthcare system in the United States. But I don't think there's any one ideal model out there. The Canadian model certainly is great, but certainly there are many folks who come across the borders of the United States for healthcare as well who are Canadians because they don't want the wait. So I think we just have to, as a community, sit at the table, make sure all the stakeholders are at the table, talk about what is it that we need to do as a community to try to rebalance some of these many issues that will impact our community as the boomers age and have a significant impact on what's going on. Let me leave you with this last few comments. The demographic trend related to the boomers aging is really about doing the right thing to make our community livable for all generations. The issues that we're talking about today, those issues exist today for our seniors that are in the community today. It's just by our sheer numbers being boomers that somebody's having to stand up and take notice of these issues. But these issues exist today. So please recognize that. They're here today. We've got some great organizations in the community that try to respond to these needs, but the need will grow significantly because of the boomers. And because we are the boomers and we've been the largest group of individuals to move through this nation, we've changed every system we've impacted. It just should be recognized that we will change how seniors age. So these issues exist today. They're not new issues, but they will grow in magnitude because of the boomers. Thank you for coming out this afternoon.